Let's talk about pre-testing. It is really important to take the time to pre-test. It seems like a waste of time. You spent so much time preparing your questions, thinking of every possible contingency, looking them over. You know they're good questions. Unfortunately, the obvious isn't always the case. Sometimes you just don't see a perspective that you weren't expecting. And the worst time to find out that you have problems with your questions is after you've collected 500 surveys. So pre-test. One of the most effective ways, I'm not going to say it's the most common, but one of the most effective ways of pre-testing is what's called the cognitive interview. A person thinks aloud their thought process as they answer the questions. Other researchers listen and examine the wording to make sure it is correct, and they listen to see, is that person saying what I expect them to say? Now, you can't do that with just one person. You need to do it with several because you want to know that the thought processes are similar, that they are envisioning as they talk about what they're thinking about. You want to make sure they are thinking about similar things. They're understanding the question in a similar way. If they are not understanding the question in a similar way, you really want to reword the question to try and make it that way. This is a very time-consuming process. I'm not going to lie, but it is a very helpful way to make sure that your question is going to give you consistent answers. The other thing is you actually pre-test. You're not going to conduct many cognitive interviews because they're so time-consuming, but you can pre-test at least 20 questions, or at least with 20 people, asking them to make comments as they think about things as they go along. Try different question forms for different formats for a single question if the cognitive interview brought up a potential. It's just an important thing to do to try and avoid problems later down the road that you just don't anticipate. Now, you think you asked a good question, but you need to get advice. You should also let your questionnaire be reviewed by your advisor or other experts in the field so that they can look it over and see if they believe you're asking everything. And not only just the questions, but have you included things? Have you forgotten any concepts? Those are also things that need to be covered in the pre-test. Don't skip these steps. You'll pay dearly at the end of the day when there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, I wanted to give you just a few statistical notes. Likert scale data. Take the mean or present percentages for each response. A lot of people say you can't take the mean of ordinal data. The difference between 1 and 2 is not the same as the difference between 4 and 5, so when you average it, you mess up things. It just doesn't work. Well, it turns out that ordinal data can be treated as interval if a QQ plot is linear. That is, if you can show that the data are cumulatively normally distributed. I'm going to show an example of that in a second, but another thing, if you have scales, that is collections of questions measuring the same underlying variable, say for example depression scale, and you are concerned about normality, you can use what's called a Roche analysis. It still gives you, rather than taking the sum of all the scores, to give you a scale score, you can compute a Roche score. Now the advantage of the Roche analysis is that it uses, rather than the values, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, taking the mean of those numbers, it looks to see how many people answered question 1, or gave response 1, how many gave response 2, 3, and 4. And it uses basically a logit, which is the log of the probability of saying 1 divided by the probability of not saying 1 to the answer of a score. It turns out that these logits are linear, and they can be averaged and added up to come up with a single score. The Roche analysis has some limitations to it as well, but it's a good method, and it's generally more accepted than taking the mean of Likert scale data. But you can make the argument for your Likert scale if you've established the QQ plot. So let me show you what one of those look like. This is from SPSS. On the left is a scale that is reasonably normally distributed. And the thing that I want to suggest here is if your data are normal, then normally distributed, then you can average things. And if they're cumulatively normal, let's look at this. Here are in this particular study, this had a scale that had the values 0 through 4. And you notice, and over here are z-scores basically, and you notice that there is a reasonably straight line that goes through them. It's not perfect, but it's reasonable. And so what that means is the difference between 0 and 1 is the same as the difference between 3 and 4. Now over here in this question, they're not so linearly or so normally distributed. You can see the skew here. Now sometimes this skew, it could be argued that this could be cumulatively normal if you think about the right side. Like the normal distribution goes like this. And I think that's why it's not normally distributed more, because this might drop down too fast for the right side of the bell-shaped curve. But you can see the lines, the dots are not on the line as well. So this one, we would probably want to do a Roche analysis for this, as it deviates a little bit from normality. And since these are both from the same survey, we'd want to do a Roche analysis on the whole thing, even though some could be done normally. Okay, that's going to be it for this